That would bring us then to speakers, if there are no further deputations and no further. Oh, I guess we have questions of staff. I've forgotten about that. Sorry. Are there questions of staff?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to, I don't know, the city manager or anyone else you want to delegate the answer to, staff. We were looking for a legal framework on what to do in situations where non-permitted groups take public space and violate the principles of anti-discrimination. I'm wondering, this report that we've got here mostly deals with situations in which permitted groups have violated our anti-discrimination policy. Do you think we may have missed the boat on this one?
Through the chair, well, I should say first of all that the response is twofold. So there is the public report, but there's also a confidential legal report. So when you're talking about the response to the council directive, I think we need to be speaking about both of them. So I recognize that what you're looking for in terms of a legal framework is not contained in the public report, but I would suggest that it is in the legal report, and that if we wanted to go into that, that would be the appropriate way to have that conversation.
So there were letters written to the chair of the Toronto Police Services Board and the Attorney General to see whether there was any kind of investigation to events on June the 9th, 2018. Have you received any response from either the chair of the Police Services Board or the Attorney General's office to these inquiries?
Unfortunately, we have not. So the process with that is when Executive Committee requests another entity to provide a response, the clerk following the meeting writes to them, which are the letters that you have, and we confirmed that they did not respond. And our office also reached out to the Ministry of the Attorney General as well and did not receive a response.
So we don't know whether they're working on it or whether they're not. There's just been no response.
There's been no response. Correct.
So one of the other issues we were concerned about is cost recovery. We have dozens of groups that apply for road closures, festivals, marathons. They pay a very large TTC reroute fee, solid waste fees for security. They play by the rules. We were also looking for suggestions and policy on what we do when groups don't play by the rules and take over University Avenue, use up dozens of police officers who are sworn officers on duty and being paid by the city, and don't pay a dime in any of the costs related to an event. And I don't see anything here about addressing that.
I think that you're correct that it's not in the public report, but I would suggest that that is also covered in the confidential legal report. I guess the final thing I would say is I know there's charter challenge chill. In other words, don't do anything that violates the charter. But my notes indicate that a charter challenge could cost a plaintiff $300,000 to $500,000. How often do you think we would be subject to a charter challenge if we implemented our anti-discrimination policy? I guess I would start by saying that we do apply our anti-discrimination policy and that the city does not prohibits hate activity on city property, and that is what the hate activity policy provides for. So I mean, my position is that we do implement our policy on a case-by-case basis, which is the, I guess, appropriate way to do so.
So when we banned the white supremacist group and the Holocaust deniers from library, first they did have an event, then they applied for another event. TPL said no. Did they launch a charter challenge?
I don't believe so, but I wouldn't know.
So in other words, if we take, I don't know, let's call it the high road, and we remain a city of high purpose and principle, it's unlikely that we're ever going to be subject to a charter challenge, really, by most groups. They're not going to invest the years of litigation and lawyers' fees to take us on.
Unfortunately, I'm not able to speculate on what that would be, but I would say that in that circumstance, the circumstance that resulted in people being denied a permit at the library would likely result in the same with the city's policy. Our policy would also probably have resulted in a denial of a permit in that circumstance. So our policy is actually not that different from theirs.
So just very, very quickly, We're talking about public space, the space that we control. These groups, as deplorable as they are, they can gather in a restaurant and spew their, I guess, their hatred, or go to a private hall, a banquet hall, or whatever, as deplorable as it is. Our reach is city property and city facilities.
That's correct.
Okay. So we're not telling anyone they can't gather, they just can't gather and leverage city space.
Last question.
Our policy provides that people cannot conduct hate activity on city property, correct?
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Thank you for the answers. Are there any further questions of staff? Okay, we can move then to those wishing to speak.
I guess it's me. I think we have to send this. I think we have to send this back. I think there is an important message here.
Do you have a motion just to?
Yes, I do have a motion. If we could put it on the screen. We need more of what we were asking for originally, and I mean, there was a feeling here in many of the deputants that this was picking on Quds. Well, Quds has a multi-year record documented by numerous organizations of making defamatory and discriminatory comments and espousing violence as a way to settle political and geographical disputes. And yet we still have other forces at play within the civic government or within our facilities, which are disconcerting. The rise of Nazi ideology, white supremacist groups. We need to have a legal framework going forward in which we have the guidance on what to do when groups don't play by the rules. Where they don't sign our anti-discrimination policy, they don't properly book the space, they don't pay any of the fees. Well, Run for the Cure pays their fees, Heart and Stroke pays the fees, the Sporting Life Marathon pays their fees, Taste of Manila in my ward, they pay tens of thousands of dollars in fees. They play by the rules, and we have to have a situation in which we can recover our costs from groups that are not playing by the rules and implement our anti-discrimination policy. So I think we have to send this back for a second look. That's what I'm moving here today, and I appreciate your support. I thank the mayor's support, and I certainly thank some of the deputants for coming in. I should remind my colleagues that we updated the anti-discrimination policy a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. Actually, it was longer. It was more like 5, 6 years ago, and it embedded in that renewal. It hadn't been renewed in 15 years. Is an annual look to make sure that it's modernized, to make sure it keeps up with changing times, and to make sure that we can make any corrective legal edits if necessary. I think that the Charter is a valued piece of Canadian history and a valued piece of Canadian law, but very rarely will groups that have violated our anti-discrimination policy launch a charter challenge. That's highly unlikely at the cost and time involved, and I think we should be a city of high purpose, of principle, and make sure that our policies are followed and that we stand up to the kind of demonization and hatred that can permeate in a city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Are there any other speakers? Well, I will speak for just a minute and say this. First of all, I believe that I have, as mayor, and prior to that, but we'll speak only as my time as mayor, a proud and very consistent record, further to the comments that were made earlier in the discussion by some of the deputants about whether we were singling out one disconcerting, to say the least, kind of language and conduct as opposed to another. I have been one of those who've gone because I believe it's important for the mayor of the city, whoever that is, to go when there are acts of anti-Semitism, evidenced by graffiti and other kinds of things. I was one of those at the very front of initiating our anti-black racism strategy. We had an action plan, which we now have in place. And the same is true when there have been incidents of anti-Muslim rhetoric and activity in the city. I've been the first, because I think it's my job to be the first to speak up about those kinds of things. In fact, I'll be at a mosque tomorrow showing my solidarity with the Muslim people for the horrific act that took place. So the positions that I would take on these kinds of things, and my rationale is a little bit different in wanting to see this followed up upon, because I think it has a lot to do with accountability. I would take the same position with any group where there was a danger of or a demonstrated history. But in this case, I'll say a danger because there's clearly a dispute about what the demonstrated history is or is not of hate speech. Because I think this city, Councillor Pasternak referred to it as a higher purpose or higher goal we seek. We are seen as a city in the world that is doing better when it comes to discouraging and prohibiting and making sure there is no need to discourage or prohibit because people are not inclined to spew hatred or discrimination against others. And I think that whereas the world is seemingly drifting in the other direction, where that seems to be more and more acceptable to more and more people, I think we are well advised to stay the course and push back hard on the trend that is emerging in other parts of the world that sort of seems to say it's okay to divide and to polarize on the basis of faith or skin color or sexual orientation or anything else. And I think that involves being more vigilant without interfering with the freedoms that we value so much in this country. And so I would say there's a number of reasons why this is the right time to be talking about this. In 2019, the political climate around the world says more than ever it's a time to address these issues. It happens to be addressed in this report in the context of one particular event, but I think the lessons we can learn from trying to find ways to monitor and hold people to account for this kind of language under the law are valuable. Secondly, I would just say to you that without reciting them all, the statistics from our own hate crime reports, the last one we have for 2017 that was out last year, showed a 28% increase in hate incidents in the city. And by the way, the top two categories happen to be, because they've both been mentioned here today, acts of hatred against Jewish people and against Muslim people. And so, and it's almost equal. There were slightly more Jewish people. Hamilton, to pick an example, same thing, an 18% increase. This is a disconcerting trend, to say the very least. It's going exactly the wrong way from where we want it to go. And so I said that, and then the third reason why it's appropriate today, this is the International Day for Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and I really believe that the intent of that day includes all kinds of discrimination. So I think if you start from the fact that we sit here in a place that seems to have it more right, far from perfect, as evidenced by, I guess, this discussion, but we have it more right than any other places, what I'm seeking from this is the following, which is a greater degree of accountability. And that's why I asked the questions that I did of a couple of the people who seem to have a slightly more official capacity for being here. I won't say they're the organizers of the Quds, they didn't acknowledge that either, but there's certainly people who are quoted in the news and others as being associated with these kinds of things. And my search is for accountability. And I commented earlier on the fact that politicians are routinely criticized and cynically criticized for saying they were misquoted or taken out of context. And I accept the fact that can happen. I've probably been guilty of saying it myself, and maybe I was being very sincere in saying it. But at the end of the day, I would have been much more heartened if I'd heard here today, and I would have found much less need for us to sort of go back and look for accountability, even from our own public servants, for the fact that we wrote letters off to the police and the Attorney General's Department and didn't hear back. And I think a reasonably diligent pursuit of this, which I think is a legitimate issue to be looked at in the broader context, is that we should have heard back about whether there was a police report and whether there had been an Attorney General's review of this kind of thing. So that I'm looking as much from Councillor Pasternak's motion to just make sure we follow through on the principle that people should follow up on these things. And if the report comes back and it's entirely benign and says nothing happened and nothing to see and nobody wrote anything up, that's fine with me in the context of saying, well, at least we would know that. And so one of the reasons I think we have to have a second look is for that reason. But I think the more important thing is, and more important than what we might do to find further ways to have the law upheld, the hate speech law, and make sure that's discouraged, is to have shared accountability on the part of everybody, including some of the people who spoke today, for the fact that we you know, it isn't good enough to say somebody was standing over in the corner and they weren't really an official speaker, even though they had the microphone. I think we have to do better than that, and I think we have to do better than that, especially in public spaces, but especially in this city, where I will continue to speak up for as long as I have this job against any kind of, this kind of hateful speech or discriminatory speech, because it has no place here. It's not what we're about. It's why we're admired around the world and why people come here in droves from all over the place to escape that kind of thing. And so I will conclude on that note and see if there's anybody else who wants to speak, and otherwise I think we would be ready to call the question on the motion that Councillor Pasternak put in front of us. Anybody else? Okay, so we have the motion which we'll put up on the screen. It's motion 1, and it's self-explanatory, I think. Just get some further information on this from the city manager. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Are you opposed? No. Oh, okay. All in favor? In favor? All in favor. Thank you very much. It's carried. And thank you, everybody who participated in this. And I'd like to hope, aside from, I will say, aside from the use of the word racist to describe some of these inquiries and so on, that everybody participated in good faith today, and we should maybe move forward to see if we can't find a better answer than having repeated discussions here about this.